All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking an hour of your time out to come listen to me talk about video games and card games and things, and how they can help teach you something that you might be able to learn to use in your classroom in ways that you didn't necessarily expect it to be useful. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sort of background of how I came, what sort of I got thinking about when I first came up with the idea for this presentation a while back. I'm going to start off by talking about something that I noticed that didn't make a lot of sense. This started when I was reading about gamification a few years ago, and I started thinking about how all the things that gamification literature was stressing at the time. This is, it's evolved a little bit since then, but it didn't seem to make sense with what actually happens in the game market. And I have dubbed this the Minecraft problem because of one particular game that really illustrates the thing that is at the heart of my question, this sort of incongruity that I noticed. So I want to talk about, first off, what is gamification? And this is the definition I found. I found a bunch. This was the one that I just picked because it fit on the slide. But basically, the idea is to take elements of game play, that is scoring, competition, rules of play, and so on, and apply them to other activities. Usually marketing, though also has been used in education, and it's done as a way to promote greater engagement with the product, with the content, etc. So the first thing I want to point out, this is my giant disclaimer. Oh, I guess not yet. So gamification is used in education. I got ahead of myself. So it is done in two ways, really. One is the use of games to actually educate. And this is basically done by creating educational games or simulations or using existing games in educational modes to teach. And they can be very simple. How many people here, when you were in grade school, remember a game called Number Munchers? Or the Oregon Trail? And those are educational games. I mean, this is something that, while the term gamification is relatively new, the idea in that respect is old. It's been around a long time. A Number Munchers is a very simple game. Basically, you have a grid of I think 6x6 grid. You move a little green guy around and you eat the answers to the questions. It's really simple, pretty easy to put together. And they can be, Mario Teaches Typing is another game where you make Mario jump by typing the right letters at the right time, and it encourages you to do proper typing techniques in order to hit the rhythms that you need to in order to complete the level. Now, even in law school, there are educational games that are out there. There's simulated cross-examination games. I've seen various simulated direct and cross-examination, like I said. A few other things out there. Introducing evidence I've seen as a simulated game. It's there. In outside examples, so I don't know how many people here are really game literate. How many people here have heard of a game called Assassin's Creed? So Assassin's Creed, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is there are a series of games that take place in different historical periods in which you're an assassin going around killing people, but there's also a big exploration element where you go around painstakingly recreated historical locations, and there's an in-game little encyclopedia that pops up when you go to some place that tells you about what that place is and sort of its historical significance. The most recent Assassin's Creed game that came out takes place in ancient Egypt. And they included something called Museum Mode, which essentially takes out all of the killing missions and is just going around and exploring. And they did that so that that could be used in classrooms to talk about, so that you could have like some interactive look at what life was like in an ancient Egyptian city. So that's sort of an example of using a game to educate. You could also make games, or make education game-like. And this is that gamification stuff that was from that definition that I talked about a minute ago. You take those game elements and you use those to augment classroom or homework type activities. Usually this involves incentives or incentive systems or competitions. So now I'm going to get to my disclaimer. This is not a talk about gamification. After I spent all this time introducing it, that's not what I'm here to talk about. So I want to get to the sort of background is going to get to this problem that I noticed. So, how many people here have heard of Minecraft? How many people here have played Minecraft? Maybe a little bit. How many people have kids who have their kids who played it? There's a pretty good chance that eventually your kids are going to play this. So Minecraft is the fastest selling game of all time, and you can make things like a fountain of cats. You know how many? I'm really glad that nobody was looking over my shoulder while I was Googling cat fountain. So I want to give you an idea of how quickly Minecraft is sold, how popular this game is. It's been out for 7 years. As of January of 2018, it had sold 144 million copies, making it the second best-selling game of all time. And I say it's the fastest-selling game of all time because number one is Tetris. Tetris has sold 170 million copies and came out in 1984. So we're talking like 5 times as old, and it's, relatively speaking, barely sold more copies overall. So Minecraft is a procedurally generated world. And the world consists basically of little bricks. And these little bricks can be mined for resources, used to build things, whatever. There's also creatures and whatnot that populate the world. And you have some tools that you can go out, you can mine for things, you can fight the stuff that's out there, you can make other things to fight the stuff that's out there, you can build whatever you want. The thing about Minecraft is that there's no goals. You're kind of just out doing whatever it is you want. There's no score. There's just a couple of rules. There are 5 game modes, though one of them, how much of a game mode it is questionable, but so the basic mode is survival mode, where you have to keep getting resources to stay alive and fight off whatever comes after you. But there's also creative mode. Creative mode has all the tools unlocked, and you basically can just do what you want. And those are generally the 2 most common modes. And most people I talk to, people who build cat fountains, they play in creative mode. There's also an adventure mode in which I could build a map and then put it out there, and then you could download it and play through it in adventure mode. And I could set up all sorts of things in my map. Basically, I have all the tools that are available in the creative mode at my disposal, and then whoever else downloads the map can try out whatever it is I put together and play around with it. There's also a spectator mode, so that you kind of just go around through people's creations. And then there's the multiplayer, which you can do all of this stuff with a friend, or if you're so inclined, a better enemy. So, remember how I said that gamification strategies tend to focus a lot on incentive systems, goals, and competition? if that's what makes games engaging, then Minecraft's success is completely inexplicable. Because Minecraft has no goals, it has no incentives, and it really doesn't have competition unless you develop it on your own. So there has to be something beyond that which talks about how games actually engage with their players. And if we can kind of find that secret sauce, that sort of whatever it is that they do, then we can find a way to harness that for other things. And the secret's got to be a lot deeper than the incentive systems. I mean, because honestly, most game incentive systems eventually boil down to some variation of a Skinner box, where you do some sort of repetitive activity and get a little reward out of it. And, that's not engaging. It does provide incentives to keep going, but there's got to be activity underneath that has to be engaging on its own. All right, so now I'm going to actually start talking about what it is that actually engages players. I'm going to start with a guy named Mark Rosewater. There's a pretty good chance that none of you have ever heard of Mark Rosewater. Even if you play the game that he's mostly worked on, there's a decent chance you don't know who he is. This is Mark Rosewater. He's the head designer of Magic the Gathering. And he has been the head designer of Magic the Gathering for 15 years. And he was on the design team for 7 years before that. He has actually done the art of 2 cards, which both involve stick figures. But he is, he's been working on one game for 22 years now, which is very rare in the game industry. Usually in video games, a game kind of just ships and it's done. And even games that have been running for that long, like something like Ultima Online, which has been running for about 20 years now, 21, now that I think about it. None of the staff working on it now worked on it when it launched. So to have one person working on the same game for this long is highly unusual. And so let me tell you about the game he works on. Magic the Gathering is a collectible card game. It's not a video game. It's not a board game, really. And it's kind of it started as sort of this format of collectible card games. And what they are is that there are various releases of cards that come out in sets. And you can use those to construct a custom deck of cards to play the game with. Magic's format does it with random packs like baseball cards. Though the sort of modern take on it is to release packs of predefined set of cards. It's got a complete set, but that's kind of the basics of what the game type is. So Magic uses 5 colors of land. Land cards are the basic cards, and they're used to cast spells and summon creatures to defeat your opponent. You play with a custom deck of 60 or more cards, and you can't have more than 4 copies of any one card other than the basic land you need to do anything. There are 20,000 cards that have individual distinct cards, not counting reprints, that have been made over the last, since 93, 25 years, about over 90 sets that have been made. So again, it's very unusual for somebody to spend 20 or more years on the same game. So at the Game Developers Conference in 2016, his 20th anniversary of being on the design team, he gave a keynote talk on 20 lessons that he's learned while being on the design team for one game for that long. And I'm not going to go through all of them. And I actually put the video on here, and I have no idea why I did that, because I'm certainly not going to watch an hour video in the middle of an hour presentation. That doesn't make sense. I'm not going to go through all of them because he spends an hour introducing all of them, and he's talking to an audience that's much more into game design than you guys are. But this is the list of 19 of the 20, the 20th lesson being that all these lessons tie together with each other. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to tweet out a link to both the talk and the transcript that he put together on his blog. I talk about them, so there's a whole lot of them, and I'm going to talk about 6 of them. Because I think these are 6 that are really useful for us in education. All of these, to some extent, could be, these 6 I think are the ones that I want to focus on. So, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on each one, and then talk a little bit about why this is important for us to remember. All right. So, this is really the second lesson that he has, is what he says, fighting against human nature is a losing battle. People are going to have tendencies baked into them that you're going to want to you're going to not want them to do. And you really need to think about whether or not trying to break them of those habits is necessary for what you want to do. The example he gives has to do with a particular game mechanic that involves something not doing what all the players who play tested it expected it to do, and eventually he just gave in and modified the mechanic so that it fit more with how people expected it to work. So how I think this plays into education, I want to actually talk about something that a colleague at a law school I previously worked at came up with. So how many people here have problems with their students being on Facebook or Twitter or whatever during class? And no matter what you do, there's always somebody who's doing that, or grocery shopping or whatever. Not grocery shopping probably, but
they do.
Amazon. Yeah. Whole Foods. They opened the Whole Foods across the street from my law school. So anyway, so I got all this stuff going on, and it's often very difficult to keep students, especially if they're taking notes on their laptops, also to kind of have a way to force them to pay attention to you and to Facebook. So a friend of mine just came up with they basically took the I Quit solution, and he set up a class Facebook page and made all the students join it. And he would have his laptop open, and he would sit there and he would type in questions on his class Facebook page and push them out. And he would use it, and he would see the responses, and he would occasionally read them, and if somebody asked a question, he might answer it in class. This obviously works better if you have a TA who can monitor the Facebook page for you, especially if you're with a large class, but it was something, it got the students paying attention to something that was class related while they were doing something that probably wasn't. And it worked. It wasn't perfect. It was kind of an ad hoc experiment, but it's something you can do. Second one I want to talk about here is lessons he calls resonance is important. Basically the lesson here was that people come preloaded with certain experiences. This is a function of when a person grows up, their culture, and the pop culture that they live around. And the example he uses has something to do with cards that represent zombies. Everybody knows what a zombie is. And so certain mechanics are very easy for people to understand because they reflect what a zombie does. The other example is one of the most basic mechanics in the game of Magic is flying. Some creatures have flying. And if a creature has flying, when it attacks, it can only be intercepted or blocked by other creatures with flying because it flies. And if a bird is flying over your head, you really can't do much about it, or a dragon is flying over your head, you can't really do much about it if you can't fly yourself. So that was a good example of something that, we know what flying is, we know what a zombie is. So where this can be useful for you is if you can find ways to understand what your students already know, and find ways to resonate with that, with the new information you're bringing in, that can be helpful. I don't have a great example for this one of something I know, but I think this is just something that's at a basic level is pretty useful. Another lesson, these three all sort of form back to back together. The third one here is what we call piggybacking. This kind of ties again with resonance. But if you can take that pre-existing knowledge, that pre-existing programming, and just add a little bit to it to help draw people towards what they need to know, that's great. The example he uses here is there was a card called, it was a card that basically was a Trojan horse. And you gave it to your opponent when you played it, and then it gave you rewards while it was in play. And everybody kind of understood immediately when they saw that it was a Trojan horse that that's how it worked. And that was in play testing, it was called Trojan horse, but there's no Troy in the setting that the game takes place in. So they wanted to call it something else. And so they originally called it, whatever the name of the city is, Lion. And they had this, take part of a giant wooden lion on it. And this is, again, still in playtesting. This is when they start expanding the playtesting pool. And everybody had trouble understanding what the card did. This wasn't a problem. Everybody kind of understood immediately what a Trojan horse was. But this something lion, everybody was confused by. So they scrapped that art. They got the artist to redraw it with a horse instead of a lion, stuck it back on the card, went back to playtesters, and everybody understood. Didn't have to explain to the playtesters anymore what the card was supposed to do. Because they saw a wooden horse, and everybody knows what a wooden horse means. If there's a bunch of guys inside of it, will pop out in the middle of the night and ruin your day. So if you can find ways to piggyback your new information and package it with something that directs them to what they need to know, then that can be helpful. That can get you some additional little bits to get you a little closer. So another set that I think are important is actually a lot. I'm going to talk about 7 of these lessons. One of them is a little bit more complex than these. And one is to make